So I am Ira Kirschenbaum. I am the semi-reluctant and excited editor of the Journal of Orthopedic Experience and Innovation, otherwise called Joey. I am here today with some special guests, Gary Hirschman, Hector Torres, and Dana Jacoby. This is an updated journal club related to private equity in orthopedics, which is, if it's not the hottest topic, it is one of the top three that I know of. That and trigger finger releases, because I need one, and Alejandro knows that. So I am going to start, if it's okay with everyone, with Gary. Is that all right? And
Sure.
you'll start us off, Gary, and tell us a bit about the article and where we stand and some general things about private equity in orthopedics, because not everyone might have read the first article, which got only 12,000 views. So I don't know what rock they're living in.
Well, I appreciate it. Just so everyone knows, I'm a healthcare transactions attorney at Epstein, Becker & Green. I've been practicing for, let's just say, over 30 years. And we represent physicians in transactions of all sorts around the country. Been doing it for over 30 years. It just so happens that what's really been keeping us busy over the last probably 3 or 4 years in particular have been private equity investments in different physician specialties. And since 2019, orthopedics has been the hottest specialty for consolidation. And so the transactions, I could share my screen real quickly just to give an overview, if that's okay. So people could see, in 2022 and 2021, there were just, enormous a transaction growth and in just reported physician transactions, and in orthopedic specialties. And these are in the article also. They were also in this presentation that Dana and I provided at the AAOS annual meeting in Las Vegas a couple months ago. And so you just see that these are just 13 of the active platforms with all the different groups they've acquired, including the ones that started back, 3 or 4 years ago or 5 years ago, some of these. And you could just see, all the different activity going on. So the reason this is happening, and I'm sure Dana could talk more about this, is that physicians in private practice are facing a lot of challenges, decreased reimbursement, increased costs. I think everybody in the country is facing increased costs, and other challenges with the move to value-based care, and just the advantages of being part of a larger organization. Not necessarily private equity, could be a hospital, could be a mega physician group, but there's just been the most activity recently with regard to private equity and their desire to invest in orthopedics and all the different ancillary services that they provide. And even for doctors who are in work at hospitals under PSAs, professional service agreements, or doctors that are employed at hospitals, a lot of them are looking to leave the hospitals now. And we've worked in the last 12 to 16 months with several groups in orthopedics and other specialties that are extracting themselves from hospitals so that they can, participate in some of these transactions, which can be very lucrative. So that's just kind of the state of the state. And the article that we published with Joey in February was kind of like an update on a couple of prior articles we did, the first one of which was in 2020. And this is, the third update, but this was a more intensive update, including, a survey of physicians and, what they think about their relationships after being part of a private equity platform. So that's kind of just an overview, Ira.
Great. Dana, if I was a, like 18-person group, what would you feel are some 2 or 3 of the fears that I would have in hesitating to go into as a main group or a bolt-on group to private equity or something of that nature? What are some of the fears? I'm going right to the heart of one of the matters.
Absolutely. No, Ira, and we educate on this, I mean, constantly. Literally, I was with a group last night in New Jersey. I mean, the first fear is always, do I lose control? I mean, how, do I lose control clinically? Do I lose my autonomy? What is this private equity stuff? Or even if you're not private equity, what if you're merging with a larger group? How do I lose control clinically or otherwise? What does this look like for my overall livelihood? And then the second question we get, is this the older physicians cashing out? Are the younger folks going to constantly just have to pull the wagon? And this is just something where people are taking chips off the table. And then the third one is really probably, what is this, are second bites real? Are these groups going to ever see a transaction again in the future? And so those are really the three fears. The interesting thing as we've gotten into this is every group starts, I know every group is different or every physician is different, but every group starts with the exact same questions. And then as you get into it and you start to say, okay, first of all, clinically, you're not going to lose control at all. You probably have more control over your livelihood than you would working for a hospital or health system due to the rules and regulations and everything else. The second piece, especially in this market, some of the younger physicians have had one heck of a run, being able to really, enjoy the fruits of sweat equity being taken off the table. And then the third one is just really the most interesting one. I think the next 24 months, you're going to see some interesting second bites in orthopedics, and you're actually going to get to see this. Had COVID not happened, we would have recognized secondary transactions in ortho. And unfortunately, we just had folks on the runway. So the good news is the myths or the fears over time somewhat get debunked, but they're real. I mean, everybody thinks the same three things, and those are the three we get most frequently in every single group or every single orthopedic surgeon we talk to.
That's great. I want you to describe, maybe you or Hector, because I want to bring Hector in on this. What is a second bite?
Mm-hmm.
You use that term. Well, I kind of know what it is, but what is it for real? Give me kind of an example. What is that? What is that term? A second bite?
Yeah, happy to jump in. And for those of you that don't know me, Hector Torres, I'm a managing director at Daiwa Securities, which is a global financial institution and nearly 2 decades of healthcare investment banking and financial advisory services experience, in particular within physician practice management. And I, along with Dana and Gary, have been one of the more active advisors in the orthopedic world. But the second bite transaction is just that. It's really within the context of private equity. And private equity, by design and definition, is not in the business of entering into a partnership with a physician group and remaining in that partnership in perpetuity. Their mission is to find a best-in-class organization clinically, partner with them, really ignite them from an access to capital, infrastructure, management expertise perspective, and ultimately grow the value of that investment, right? And sometimes folks think that the growth in that value only accrues to the private equity firm to the detriment of the physicians. But in all the deals that we structure and advise on, we always make sure that the physicians are holding the same class of stock and equity as the private equity firm. Once that period, and that period could be as short as 3 years, it could be as long as 7 to 10, and different private equity firms have different mandates and requirements in terms of the whole period. But the second bite transaction is when the private equity firm says, we have held this investment, we have grown the value of the equity in the enterprise, and now we are preparing and executing upon a transaction to realize the economic value of that growth and the appreciation of the equity that we initially invested in. And to Dana's point, it's fascinating because those three, we call them negative fantasies. They're relatively consistent across almost every single physician group we work and advise on. But fascinating thing is that there are already 3 to 4 private equity-backed orthopedic practices that are gearing up and preparing to come to market. And as that halo effect and momentum builds, we'll see even more of those organizations come to the market in the second half of this year and the first half of next.
Interesting. Dana, I forgot to have you introduce yourself. I apologize so much.
No, it's on me. Everybody else just dove right in. I went straight to the answer to the question. So no, I'm Dana Jacoby. I'm the CEO and founder of Vector Medical Group. And Vector was really started. I had gone through a private equity transaction myself. I had a medical market research firm. I did medical market research all over the world for orthopedics and aesthetics. Anyway, fast forward. Had the luxury to sell the business and then realized how little I knew. And so, unlike Gary and Hector, I didn't come up through the ranks of legal or finance on the investments banking side. I wish I had, but took the medical market research background and pivoted it to helping physicians navigate and architect their futures. And so that really grew into what it is today, which is more merger and acquisition, transaction advisory, but also really helping physicians if physicians don't want to transact or they want to do value-based care models or things like that. That's what Vector does and aligns with doctors nationally. So
That's great.
thank you.
Thank you. So I always like to quote a quote from Tolstoy, the first line in Anna Karenina: all happy families are happy in the same way. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own special way. So I feel all successful orthopedic groups are successful in the same way, and all unsuccessful ones screw it up in their own special way. So one of the promises of private equity is that you will run better.
Mhm.
And I do believe that some of the worst businesses that have the most revenue are medical practices. I mean, it's just remarkable to me to see. Have you seen, since the 2017, 2019, which you've been in this game, some evidence of that improvement of management? You know, just even anecdote. There's no such thing as anecdotes. We call anecdotes experience at the journal. You know, so what's your experience with the improvement in management?
I don't know, Gary, you want to start and I'll.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I just want to say, you know, we at AOS, we also had the Physician Transactions Conference, which was a full day of very in-depth education. And we had a panel of 5 physicians, mid-career physicians from 5 different private equity platforms. And I think that I learned a lot from that, because a lot of times we do the transaction and generally we still talk to the clients afterwards and touch base. But for the most part, they're happy. Listen, they don't all work out. You know, this is not 100% everyone's happy. There have been a couple deals where, you know, it didn't work out both ways. You know, neither party was happy, and there have been some unwinds, but it's very, very few. But one of the things the doctors on the panel said was one of the things they really liked about being involved with private equity is they didn't need the headaches of the business side of running the practice, from, you know, hiring people at the office like non-physicians, negotiating with managed care companies, just dealing with all the back office things. And, you know, they even said, and this is something that a few of them kind of nodded in agreement, which is one person said, you know, every now and again, you know, we had one tough physician who was a partner. You know, there was like 12 of us, and one of them was just so crazy. We did the deal, and like, we don't have to worry about this guy anymore. And, you know, the private equity management, you know, when it comes to business stuff and all the things where this one partner, you know, there's always one in a large group of, you know, 5, 10 or more, there's always 1 or 2 that are more difficult. And they didn't have to deal with that anymore. And so I have heard them really, you know, enjoy that kind of leadership and kind of taking away the headaches. But Dana, maybe you could comment more about real operations and stuff.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's a great question, Ira. I think the biggest thing that I see, you know, my classic line when I go in to consult with a group is, if I gave you $150 million, what would you do with your practice? And physicians are so intelligent about, we would do this, we would do this, we would hire this, we would build this ASC. And then you say, well, what's holding you back? And well, I don't want to personally guarantee a loan. And every partner meeting goes to blows when we're trying to divide who's going to take out what. And so, I think the deals that have gone well are the ones where the group has clinical autonomy and capital expansion at the same time. And the doctors know exactly what they're trying to do. The recruitment of talent, I saw the chat box come up. I'll talk about recruitment of physicians in a minute, but recruitment of leadership. A lot of our orthopedic groups are still run from the administrator that just isn't ready for prime time to take things to the next level. When we're looking at things like building an ambulatory surgery center, we know those are the future of the specialty, especially this specialty. This is the one specialty that is just going to be amazing from an ambulatory surgery center transaction standpoint. We can't get some of our groups out of our own way to build them one by one. Now you can build 3, 4, 5 in one annual split. And then value-based care, some of my more successful groups that have no need to do anything, when we start talking about them going into value-based care, they have to hire an actuary, they have to hire data analysts, they have to do QA, QC on their data. And I start to explain what that's going to cost from a cost perspective on a pro forma, and the faces in the room, the blood drains out of their face. And so I think it's really being able to have capital expansion and clinical autonomy at the same time, if you choose wisely. The thing that can undermine this if you do not choose wisely is that cultural fit has to be there. It's not just about the money, it's about the right fit, the right partner, and the right growth opportunity for the future.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll give the group some concrete examples. There's one of the larger national private equity backed groups. And Dana, Gary, and I, just by way of context, we find it's always best practice when you have all three disciplines involved and working in unison on your behalf. So you have the strategic consulting side, you obviously have experienced M&A and deal counsel, and then you have your investment banking advisor that is really kind of the quarterback of the entire M&A process. And we advise on groups that are joining existing PE-backed platform organizations. And we also advise on the larger groups that become kind of the initial platform investment. And to give you a living, breathing case study, we advised on a transaction with one of the larger PE firms recently, about a year and a half ago. And we checked back in about a year ago and said, how is it going? And operationally, and more importantly, from my vantage point, financially, what has been the change, right? And there's really two drivers to financial performance, right? There's revenue and how you manage your operating expenses, right? Those are the two basic components of an income statement and a P&L. He said, Hector, let me give you two clear examples on both sides of that ledger. On the revenue side, we went from being a price taker and engaging in hand-to-hand combat with our local, managed care representative of Blue Cross Blue Shield. And he described that process historically as a knife fight in a telephone booth. And it was always, the rates are going down, not up. Right? I said, well, what's different a year ago, a year into this partnership? He said, well, our private equity firm partner established a very robust board of advisors comprised of, surprise, surprise, two former very senior executives of United Healthcare, okay, who understand that organization intimately because they were managing it at the highest level. So I said, well, how did that change your negotiation with United this year? He said, it's very simple, Hector. We went from having a conversation with our local representative to having a conversation with his boss's 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 boss. So it's a very different level, and ultimately positioning us to eventually be talking about a national contract, right? That's on the come, even for the larger groups, but that's the evolution of that. And I said, well, what's the tactical implication? He goes, well, we didn't get a lower rate, we got a higher rate. So now we've improved our revenue trajectory. Right. Then secondarily, on the operating expense side, he said, Hector, with basic blocking and tackling over 12 months post-partnership, things like group purchasing, things like consolidation of financial reporting and controls and back office infrastructure, scaling and operationalizing our local, regional, and national management teams, we wiped out 12% of our operating expense, right? And we all know operating expense inflation is the death blow of independent practices because your revenues are going down and your expenses are going up. What does that mean? Your earnings are going in the wrong trajectory, right? So again, it's not even anecdotal, it's real and it's very early. The full value creation is really realized. You really start to realize that, along with things like full income repair. And we can talk about what that means for the partner physicians. It really, in the second and third year, the fact that in the first year they were able to realize systematic improvements in their financial position shows you the power of that private equity could bring. Gary makes a great point. There are different flavors, sizes, types of private equity firms. They all have different strategies. It's really about, to Dana's point, finding the organization that is in most cultural alignment with you. That's number one. The strategy that they want to deploy is in unison with what you would do if you had unfettered access to capital. And then, are the economic terms compelling enough for every physician cohort and, importantly, the prospective future partners and physician leaders of the enterprise?
Yeah. So Ira, can I just add to that real quick before you move on?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I just want to point out that the deals that don't work out, that minority of deals, are, in my experience, either because the group didn't really look for the cultural fit, they just looked for the highest price, and didn't think about cultural fit. I mean, in the deals I work on, I would say at least half of the groups don't go with the highest bidder. And I think that that's important. But the deals I've seen out there, I haven't really worked on any yet that have not worked out or been very, people unhappy, are, the ones where there's not cultural fit, or the doctors really didn't understand like what the deal was. And so that's kind of where I think there's some remorse. On the question about the recruiting of new people out of med school, fellowship, residencies, that is crucial. Everyone thinks that, this is gonna impact our ability to recruit. The answer is that what they want to do is they want to expand. They want to help you build an ASC. In fact, like managed care, they hire like senior executives from Surgical Centers of America and Surgery Partners. I mean, a lot of these ones do. And so they really have expertise, and they want to expand, and they need to bring in new blood. And they know that they have to be competitive to recruit, and also with incentive packages, with equity and all that kind of stuff. And we actually put in the agreements that they have to be competitive to continue to recruit the top talent consistent with past practice. We also put in the agreements the clinical autonomy, the fact that vacation, is the same as in the past, and scheduling of what offices you go to, what call coverage you have, is all consistent with the past. So people that think that all this is going to change, are wrong, and there is alignment on bringing in and recruiting additional great talent.
Let me ask Matt Barber, does that answer your question about the recruiting graduating surgeons, I think?
Yes and no. I think it kind of, the question is what those incentives are. And I ask because we're a group that has not, we've talked about it, but not meaningfully explored a PE deal to this point. And a couple of candidates that we've interviewed and two that we've hired that are starting soon have specifically asked during the process, hey, have you done this? Are you looking at doing this? One asked, I want it in my contract that the group agrees not to do a private equity deal, which we can't contractually obligate ourselves to. But it's on the minds of a lot of residents and fellows right now, and they feel like they're gonna, the scrape's already been taken, and they're taking a giant haircut coming in from day one. So how would you address that?
Yeah, I'll start, Matt, just because I think it's important to understand the color. And I taught in 14 med schools last year on this topic. I've never been asked to talk on this topic before in med school, ever. Everywhere from Birmingham, literally, to Colorado, where I live, to to Nashville. I mean, it was amazing. So one, just to give the
Fantastic
audience.
that they're getting that.
No, you know, I thought it was an honor. More critically, I was fascinated at how intelligent the audience was. Not intelligent, book smart. I mean, they knew private equity. They were asking questions about share structure, and I was going, when did you guys learn? Like, I thought there was like half a day of business in med school the last time I taught. So anyway, just to give you some color though, pre-COVID, 59% of doctors were employed by a hospital, health system, or private equity backed venture. That number is now ticking up at 76%. And that includes plastic surgeons, concierge. So just some color on the average med student coming out, the odds of them hanging their own shingle. I've got a couple of independent solo practitioners right now that are trying to recruit for somebody to take over their practice. It's few and far between of folks that actually want to hang their shingle, be up till 10 o'clock at night in partner meetings. But the world, I was talking to a physician the other day, and he said, you know, when I got out of med school, it was the opposite. 75% of us were, you know, independent, and 25% of us were hospital employed or other. So that's point number one. Point number two, and Gary and Hector can really talk about this, but if a private equity deal is structured correctly, because the deal doesn't work. If you replace the senior physicians with a younger doctor, or you can't find a younger doctor, this goes off the rails, right? It's the only business that I can think of where the human capital is what you're investing in. I mean, it's a huge liability. You guys aren't happy, the whole thing comes off the rails. So the whole idea is for certain profit shares to be set aside, or for certain monies to be set aside where associate physicians can come in, and just like they would get on a partnership track, they have certain aspects of the deal set aside. So they become a shareholder. More critically, and I'm not pro or anti-PE, but they're a single stock shop. If they're in an independent, you're in Birmingham, Alabama, you're in Nashville, Tennessee, the payers cut rates there. Versus this, you're a mutual fund. Now you're a part of a much bigger investment. So for a lot of the younger doctors, them to me, not me to you, them to me, they're concerned about their livelihood of what happens if the payers cut rates, or if Amazon moves into our backyard, or Optum takes over our primary care group. What does this look like for our referral source if we're in one practice with one TIN in one state? So I think there's a lot more to it. But I think for any of the PE deals that have been done successfully, they have a massive lens on what recruitment looks like. Because again, this is the only human cap, and Hector can talk to this more than anybody. It's not a widget factory. Without the doctors, the bus doesn't go. I mean, this is the one human capital intense business that is a massive liability if you lose the physicians.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, physician groups are like an investment bank, right? The assets don't sit on the balance sheet. They're coming up and down the elevators and in the clinics, viewing the patients, and in the OR performing surgery. The irony about the younger physicians and the folks coming out of programs and being very reticent about private equity is, it's fascinating to see the shift in perspective and point of view with just a little bit of education, because the younger physicians are the ones that stand to benefit the most over the long term. What we do, what we curate in every process, is we obviously are negotiating the broader transaction holistically, but then we develop and hone in on an individual physician financial plan over the life of their clinical career. And we show the early partners and even the associates, and I'll talk about how we create incentive mechanisms for even the non-partner physicians to benefit both at the closing of the first bite and obviously over the course of the appreciation and the value of the partnership. But when you take into consideration ordinary income, right, with no scrape, and saying, let's remain independent and let's assume that managed care rates don't go down over time, and all these external variables and competitive dynamics we're immune from all of that, right? Which we all know that's not true, but let's just say it is. And you compare and contrast it to all of these deals are done at long-term capital gains, right? And there's a significant arbitrage. And every incremental bite, the second, the third, the fourth, and fifth bite, which some of the younger docs will see, they'll see 3 and 4 secondary transactions. Those are all at long-term capital gains rates relative to ordinary income. And most physicians in the specialty, unfortunately, are at the highest tax bracket, right? So there's a huge tax arbitrage. And when we show them, here's what you stand to make over the course of your clinical career from today until you retire at an ordinary income tax rate, not doing the deal versus doing the deal and assuming very modest returns on those secondary transactions. Look, we've worked on deals and secondary transactions where the physicians realized an 8 and a 9 times cash on cash return. I wouldn't bank on that. Private equity is targeting 3 to 4x. But even when you look at a 2 and a 3x assumption over the course of that physician's career, it's literally sometimes as parabolic as 10 to 1 differential in total wealth creation over the career. It is so eye-opening that it's fascinating that when we have that discussion and dialogue with those young physicians, they become the advocates. They're like, let's get our deal done now. Like, we really need this now. There's a lot of those negative fantasies that I think it's our job to dispel, right? I also say, and this will sound self-serving, bear with me. I think there's a direct correlation between having a team of advisors that, number one, understands your organizational goals and objectives. That's where we begin, right? All private equity is not created equal. The strategy, the culture, the timelines, the terms, the conditions, where they want to focus versus where they want the providers to focus, all of that is different. If we begin there and really curate a bespoke, customized process to find the right capital partner for you, there's a very high correlation to long-term success and sustainability, because that is the key. This is a human capital business. When you have unsophisticated advisors, or unfortunately, we do see a lot of transactions that have no advisors, no one's minding the shop on things that Gary articulated around protecting your all things clinical, anything that has to do clinically, preserving that autonomy. And importantly, a lot of doctors don't realize you have to preserve that in perpetuity, not just for the first bite. Because if you don't, then what happens is you go to the next private equity firm and they say, hey, that's great. You had that agreement with the old private equity firm. We don't care about that. We codify in legal documentation that those rights, privileges, governance rights, and all the privileges that inure to the physicians inure in perpetuity.
Ira, can I ask a question to this
Oh,
group
yeah,
here
yeah,
for a second?
Oh, Mike.
Because I was trying to jump in, but that was a long answer to Matt's question. Dana, Gary, good to see you. Hector,
see
nice
you,
to
Michael.
meet you. That was
Pleasure.
a long answer. Anybody who goes into this is assuming that the business guys of a private equity group are going to do a much better job managing the business, negotiating contracts, and basically lowering overhead and making profit for both them as well as the group. Is that an assumption that is just a foregone conclusion? Are there somewhere that has not functioned? And, you know, I think that we're assuming that any private equity guys or group is going to do a better job negotiating than a bigger group than is doing right now. Are there examples where that's the case and examples where it's not?
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of varying examples, and I don't think that private equity comes in with a cookie cutter approach and playbook. I'll also add that the days of private equity in general coming in and saying, our strategy is to slash and burn, cut to the bone, and eliminate everything except essential, absolutely essential personnel, they just don't do that anymore. They're really in the value creation vis-a-vis in orthopedics. Let's invest in the ancillaries. Let's expand the ancillaries. Let's build de novo sites of care. Let's build ASCs. That's a lot of the value creation. And ultimately, their mission is singular in nature. It's growth. It's growth, right? It's growth, but it has to be sustainable growth. Are there horror stories? There are no horror stories that we know of in orthopedics. But private equity has been consolidating physician practice management for 30 years. I mean, dermatology, believe it or not, dental services alone has 112 private equity-backed platforms.
Gary and Dana, do you agree with that?
The dentistry has 112, yes. I do.
That's
Michael,
funny.
no, I'm being coy. No, I mean, and maybe I'm just looking at it very glass half full here, but So there's not a platform in existence in orthopedics where physician leadership isn't a massive part of the overall business development and business management. In other words, you're not handing the keys over to some sharp-elbowed Wall Street guy and saying, hey, you know more about ortho than we do. If anything, it is a partnership between very smart business folks. As a matter of fact, Gary mentioned the Physician Transactions Conference. I was fascinated. We had some younger doctors, and when they said, what do you like about this? They said, we used to make a decision in the lunchroom over a coffee, and now we actually make a decision over a 2-week period with an actual pro forma and people that are running numbers and teaching us how to run the business. So I think if anything, I think it's up-leveling some of our physician leaders in order to run their businesses at a much more intricate, higher level with really, really deep bench strength on the finance side. And there's just something about that. And there's not a right or wrong. Physicians are incredibly capable and incredibly intelligent, but it's just, every time you ask a doctor, what would you love to do? 99% of the time, they're like, I want to be in the OR. I want to be with my patients. I want to operate. I want somebody else to take care of the accounts receivable or the revenue cycle management. And that's exactly what this is meant to do. Anybody who says it's going to take the clinical control away or the physician leadership away, the platforms, back to Ira's point, any of the platforms that I know that did not do well, either A, didn't have good advisors, so they forgot to hire a deal flow attorney, they hired the brother-in-law attorney, or they didn't have a banker like a Hector, or they chose someone who didn't have good physician leadership skills as their partner at the helm. And those platforms just don't do as well as the ones that have strong physician leadership, period. I mean, that is I always joke, if I were a banker, I would just look for strong physician leaders and be like, those are the ones I want to do, because and it's the same in any health system, but especially this is not somebody taking over the keys to your car and saying, oh, you just sit in the OR. You're along for the ride. If anything, it should up-level your business management skills.
Yeah, there's a great question here.
Sorry, go ahead, Edgar.
Yeah, there's a great question around the bankruptcy of Envision.
Yeah.
And it really highlights a point that Gary made earlier. And I agree. I think the best deals that we've ever made as a team, and I personally as an advisor, are not necessarily the ones that are paying the highest price, right? These transactions are very complex. The technical term for them are, a majority equity recapitalization of a physician enterprise, right? But in simple terms, it's a leverage buyout. The operative word being leverage, right? In the go 5-year period, before kind of the last 6 to 12 months, leverage was readily available because effectively Fed funds rates were zero, right? So your cost of capital was historically at an all-time low, and cash lending leverage was so readily available, but the banks were throwing money at the PE firms. And the PE firms were leveraging these deals at 6, 7, 8, and 9 times. Envision's a great example. KKR leveraged that business to the hilt when the markets changed and they had to service that debt at a much higher interest rate. They immediately fell into technical default, and that was the death spiral that ultimately resulted in the bankruptcy. We always say, hey, this purchase price and these financial economic terms are very sexy. We don't disagree, but we don't think that it's going to put you on a trajectory that is sustainable from a financial efficacy perspective. And that's a big reason why the best deals are not necessarily the ones at the highest price.
There was a question from Assad. I want Assad to ask. Assad, could you put on your video about the worst case scenario question if you're there? Well, I'll read the question. What was the worst case scenario if the value of the business doesn't improve? What's the exit strategy for a PE firm when things don't go as planned? How does that look for the physicians?
Yeah, I can take that one. It's not on. I don't want to say it's common, but what happens in those situations, it's what's called a continuation fund vehicle or strategy. And what private equity firms do is they raise funds, right? So they'll be the established ones, the ones that are investing in healthcare are literally on their 15th, 16th, 20th fund. So let's say this private equity firm is investing at a fund 5 and they make the investment. They do all the right things. And for whatever reason, right? Because it's not a guarantee, it is a capitalist model. it doesn't go as planned, and they say, we didn't realize the growth that we wanted over the investment period. But we believe and have faith and conviction in the organization. They'll simply do the following thing. As they're raising Fund 6, they invested initially out of Fund 5. They'll basically say, in lieu of going out into the market and finding the next partner for this enterprise, what we'll do is we'll effectively sell it back to ourselves from Fund 5 to Fund 6, right? And that's typically, and it's happening a lot now because the market has cooled off relative to the all-time highs that we saw a year and a half ago. Private equity firms are saying, we know we can build more value here, we just need more time. So we'll move it from Fund 5 and we'll basically repurchase the equity in Fund 6. And basically now the clock starts again in that 3 to 7 to 10 year investment horizon. And that's where they're able to realize the full growth.
So can I just add a couple of things, Ira, very quickly?
Sure.
Number one, the culture and selecting the firm is important. Some groups go into this process and decide there's not a firm we met or an offer we like, and we're going to go look at another option. So reverse diligence is, they do due diligence on your group, but you do, with the help of an investment banker like Hector, you do reverse diligence on them, and you look at how they performed. If they haven't done any other physician specialty, like if they haven't been, a lot of the really good ones are the ones who have been in dermatology, in eye care, in OBGYN, in various other physician or healthcare specialties, especially physician specialties, and they could show their track record, especially in eye care and dermatology, which have gone through second, third, fourth, and fifth bites. And each time it keeps going up, and the value goes up. So that's very, very important, is not only their culture, but their past performance in physician services. The other thing I just mentioned about second bites, the other thing I'm only going to generally address a question without, I can't talk about any particular company, but I just want to point out that there have been issues with some of the anesthesiology, emergency room, radiology platforms that, now, as you guys know, those are all hospital-based physicians.
Yep.
They basically go to hospitals and they read x-rays, they administer anesthesia, they do ER. People, they don't make referrals, right? They're not business generators. They're just doers. They're somewhat commoditized. And I think because of that, it's very hard to compare those types of platforms to dermatology, eye care, orthopedics, cardiology, et cetera. So I just think, I'm not going to, get into any specifics about a particular platform, but I just want you to keep in mind that that's where a majority of the bad stories you hear are in those specialties. I've also heard about a couple, like a Texas dermatology group that just basically, they just decided they changed their mind after their closing and wanted to fight back and whatever. But it's, again, these are relatively rare in surgical subspecialties. But
Yeah, I have a
do
question.
you want to answer the question about debt?
Well,
Yeah,
I-
sorry.
Hold on one second. I just want to get a question from Ed Hellman, and then we'll talk about the debt. Ed, you had a question where you said, as a group that declined to participate in private equity. Do you give us a little bit of a overview about why you declined to go?
Certainly.
Yeah.
First of all, it's nice to see you again, Dan and Gary.
You too.
So I am the president of OrthoIndy. OrthoIndy is a large orthopedic group in Indianapolis. We have kind of a unique situation in that we own our own hospital. In addition to the hospital, we have orthopedic urgent care, physical therapy, multiple MRI sites. So we really have pretty much every area of ancillary income within our platform. So we initially started looking at PE deals in either 2018 or 19. Multiple investment bankers had reached out to us in an attempt to market us to PE, and it got to the point where, as leadership, we felt we couldn't turn down the opportunity to find out whether or not this was right for our partners. We spent about a year working with somebody who I had imagined is very much like Hector, and exploring it. We found a few things. For a group like ours, first of all, we are actually less attractive to a PE company than we thought we would be, in part because there's nothing distressed about us. And there was no way that simple management was going to improve our operations. We also are not really scalable. You can't build another orthopedic hospital like you can ASCs. Although we thought of ourselves as a platform, it really didn't look quite that way to the PE groups. From our perspective, we felt like we're big enough to hire pretty good talent that could lead our group where we wanted to go without having to do a PE deal. And we just kind of looked at it and felt like it wasn't in anybody's best interest. I'll admit that our group isn't every group.
Yeah.
And we're in a little bit of an enviable situation. But we spent a year, and we spent a lot of time and effort looking into this. And the fact that I'm on discussions like this means that it's still a topic of interest. And I think that as a leader of the group, I need to stay informed about how things are moving and what's changing and what differences are coming down the road.
Hector, you had some comments about the debt too?
Yeah, there was a question around who owns the debt in these deals and what happens if it all comes crashing down. Very simplistically, because it gets really convoluted with different kind of legal tax and different entities and structures. But in its most simple form, the master entity can be typically called Topco or whatever name the organizations want to give it. That master entity holds all of the debt and all of the equity of the private equity firm and the equity that the physicians roll over in the First Bite transaction. Below that Topco is simply stating the MSO and the PC, the clinical enterprise. In most states, a private equity firm or any non-physician can't own equity in the PC. So there is basically a PSA between the MSO and the PC, but all of it kind of rolls up into that Topco. That's where the debt is held. The physicians nor the private equity firm are personally guaranteeing that debt. That debt is as a liability on the Topco balance sheet. And let's assume the worst case scenario. The world ends, the organization goes to hell in a handbasket. Very simply, inverse correlation between the value of your equity and the value of the debt, right? If the debt cannot be paid and it cannot be serviced, it basically has a negative correlation to the value of your equity on a rollover basis. And in the worst case scenario, what happens? Your equity goes to zero. Whatever cash is on the Topco balance sheet is used to defease as much of that debt as possible. And ultimately, the debt holders, right, the institutions that issued the debt to the organization are left holding that proverbial bag. In that worst case scenario, in 18 years, have never seen that happen in a deal that I've worked on. But that's the way it's structured. And I think that the end all be all is relative to going out and saying, hey, we're going to raise this debt to build this ASC. The bank's going to want a personal guarantee. You're going to put your mortgage up, your vehicles, whatever other collateral base you as individual partner physicians have. In this case, you're immunized from that, right? You have that Topco entity. That's the end all be all resolution to those liabilities in the event of an insolvency.
That's great. So this has been the fastest journal club that we have ever had. I think that we hit some kind of time warp because I'm looking at the clock and I would have thought we were at 8 minutes and 8:15, but it's 8:55. So I'm going to use this time to ask each of our guests, Dana first, then Gary, then Hector, just 2 or 3 minutes on where do you think the next couple of years are going to pan out for specifically orthopedics and private equity? You know, percentage growth, hospitals fighting back, you know, whatever thoughts you have.
I get to go first.
Yeah.
Great. I'll start. I'll start. I'll get to ortho, but and Gary and Hector know this story. I was in the largest independent group, multi-specialty group west of the Mississippi, and we were talking about their independence, and they kept talking about the big five. And it was Amazon, Optum, Walgreens, Walmart, CVS. And I just remained. I mean, I thought they were going to say the payers and Optum, you know, is United Healthcare, but there's a lot of shifts happening around the country right now, not just in ortho, but across the country in every specialty. In orthopedics, we went from one private equity backed platform in 2017 to 18 in 2023. I mean, that's a lot of change in a very, very short window of time. So there's going to be a lot of things that have to kind of shake out. I do think just from the volume of meetings we are having this year, I think 2023, you are going to continue to see a crescendo of deals coming through. It's probably not going to be these massive deals that you hear about, but a lot of bolt-on opportunities. Every group I'm in is nervous about their futures, big, small, and otherwise. They're trying to navigate. I think the bigger thing, if I can challenge the audience in any way on this call and in closing, it's not to be pro-private equity or anti-private equity. The groups in orthopedics have to create strategic alliances in the future in order to survive. And we've got situations right now where private equities are joint venturing with hospitals or joint venturing with physician groups, or joint venture. So it shouldn't be an us versus them or a hospital versus a PE. It's going to be, what is your geography? How do you create strategic alliances? And what does this look like for you to create the best independence level you can, whether that's independence underneath somebody's umbrella or independence that you're throwing your shovel in the ground and building your own ASC on a personal guarantee. It's really going to be open to interpretation of what that actually looks like. But I think the way of the future is strategic alliances. And the last thing I'll say, it shouldn't just be orthopedics. It shouldn't just be MSK. This is really about the continuum of care and the patient journey. And it's what's before you on the runway in primary care and what's after you on the runway in PT and SNFs and everything else. So you need to be thinking about the continuum much bigger than just the lens that is orthopedics, because it's the only way to survive, period, end of story. So
Gary, some final comments?
Yeah, so Dana stole my thunder a little bit, which is fine. I'm going to share my screen to just, I know this will probably blow people's mind. Can you see this now? No. There we go. There we go. So, you know, I started developing this chart of the major players in outpatient care about 7 years ago, and it really doesn't fit on one page anymore. If you ignore the red Cigna, that's the big five. That's the big five: United, Optum, you know, Aetna, CVS, Amazon. You know, Aetna CVS now has Oak Street, and all of these, you know, Amazon, Walmart, Walgreens, they are all moving into substantial numbers of locations and groups and primary care and also specialty care. That's the big thing. Also specialty care. And if you look down here on the bottom right, these hospital systems around the country that have purchased all the primary care groups in most markets, and probably in the market most of you are in, are now bringing on more and more specialists, including orthopedic surgeons. So we, you know, the clients that we're talking to are seeing the impact of this, especially Optum and others and Village MD and whatnot. So I think and this is really, I think in the next couple of years, this is going to get more and more powerful in terms of the extent of their reach. And I do think that things are going to get tougher, you know, each year, and that more and more smaller groups, not like Ed's group, but smaller groups that, you know, are looking to, you know, survive with all of these pressures around them. I really believe that they're going to, you know, they're going to explore. And that's what we tell everyone to do, just like Ed's group did, is explore, look into your options. You all really have, the obligation to do that, especially if you're in a group or you're an officer like the president or on the board of a group. Everyone should be looking at this and saying, where are we going to be in 3 years and 4 years and 5 years? And how are we going to best position ourselves to continue to do well? And I do believe I'm seeing the transactions start to heat up literally over the last 30, 45 days. I think there was a little bit of a pause towards the beginning of the year with the interest rates, but I don't see that impacting all of those large 18 private equity groups in orthopedics and others that want to get into orthopedics. I don't think anything's going to stop them from continuing to acquire.
All right, Hector, you want to bring us home?
I'll bring us home. Here's my predictions. For the next 12 to 18, 24 months, it will be the era of the bolt-on, meaning the smaller regional practices are going to be joining existing private equity-backed platforms. We're advising currently on one of these, which I foresee in the next 18 to 24 months becoming more on trend, consolidation of the consolidators. You're going to have adjacent regional geographies that are being managed by private equity-backed platforms. Those are going to merge to develop super regional groups, to develop regional density, size, and scale, and indispensability with the managed care organizations. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see those non-traditional market entrants paying super premium multiples and valuations for those mega groups that have developed size and scale. And my last prediction will be in the next 5 years, we will see the first publicly traded musculoskeletal enterprise.
Oh, I want to thank all three of you, Dana, Gary, Hector. My prediction is that private equity will buy out the first open access journal in orthopedics that doesn't charge article processing.
I'll give you a discount on my
There
rate.
you go.
All right. I'm looking forward to it. I want to thank everybody who was with us tonight. This was really a remarkable journal club. Great expertise from our experts, Dana, Gary, and Hector, and Ed and Matt and Marty and everybody and Mike Redler and everybody who commented. I want to thank everybody and say good night.